Imagine a dazzling Rome in 82 BC. Mighty imperial eagles circled majestically above the city, and in the very heart of the empire, on the famous forum, esteemed senators shaped the destinies of nations, determining the course of history. At first glance, Rome appeared to be the embodiment of eternity, dazzling marble, enduring glory, and undeniable power. Yet, in the shadow of the majestic Aventine, amidst the labyrinthine alleyways where poverty and despair reigned, an incredible story began to unfold, one poised to challenge established notions of power, predestination, and redemption. A young boy, barely 10 years old, became a victim of circumstance, sold into sexual slavery to settle his father's debt. He was condemned to excruciating suffering, humiliation, and oblivion. His name was Marcus Lucius Calpus. But despite unbearable trials and against the oppressive backdrop of Roman corruption and brutality, this very boy managed to reach unprecedented heights, ascending to the highest office in the Roman Republic. He stood before the world not as a broken victim, nor as a pitiable slave, but as an outstanding dictator, a visionary reformer, and a symbol of a new, transformed Rome. The inevitable question arises, how did a boy who had plumbed the depths of degradation manage to become the man who reshaped the Roman Republic? Lucius's astonishing odyssey is not merely a captivating chapter in Rome's history. It is an enduring parable of how unbearable suffering can be transmuted into an indomitable force, and how, even in the deepest darkness, a light of hope can emerge. At first glance, the city appeared an unshakable monument to grandeur. Dazzling marble temples bathed in sunlight, mighty legions carrying the Roman standard across the Mediterranean shores, and the Senate proudly proclaiming itself the bulwark of the Republic. Yet, behind this brilliant facade lay an unsightly reality. The Republic was ravaged by internal strife. The bloody civil wars between Marius and Sulla left indelible scars, shattered families, horrific proscriptions, and thousands of lives cut short in street battles. Corruption, like an infectious disease, permeated all strata of society. Senators unashamedly bought votes, magistrates shamelessly plundered entire provinces, and military commanders treated soldiers as mere pawns in their power games. In the impoverished quarters, the situation was truly desperate. The Aventine, with its dilapidated shacks and squalid alleyways, had become a symbol of pervasive poverty. It was here, amidst the bustling trade and the stench of open sewers, that Marcus Lucius Calpus was born in 92 BC. His father, Gaius Calpus, a veteran of the Gallic Wars who returned home disabled, had given his all to Rome but barely managed to make ends meet. His mother, Livia, toiled tirelessly, sewing clothes for noble families, dreaming of a better fate for her son. And so, in this daily struggle for survival, a spark of hope ignited in Lucius's heart. Lucius's appearance strikingly differed from that of his peers. His bright green eyes, inherited from his Gallic ancestors, and ash-blonde hair made him stand out among the darker-skinned Roman children. By the age of 7, he could read and write. Having learned literacy through observation, the boy would secretly watch the education of noble children while accompanying his mother on dress deliveries. Naturally gifted, endowed with a sharp mind and rare beauty, Lucius seemed a favorite of fortune. However, it was this very attractiveness that soon became his first curse, predetermining his future life. Lucius's fate dramatically changed on a bleak day in 82 BC. His father, Gaius, was consumed by a ruinous gambling addiction, which ultimately led the family to ruin. One fateful night, he fell into an exorbitant debt to Marcus Crassus, one of Rome's most influential and ruthless wealthy men. This magnate was known for his unforgiving nature. In his view, debts were to be paid with blood, land, or human lives. When the debt collectors arrived at the modest dwelling on the Aventine Hill, they hadn't come for money. They were interested in a far more valuable payment. Amidst heartbreaking cries and pleas, Gaius, broken and helpless, was forced to give up the only thing he had left, his 10-year-old son. The boy with emerald eyes and ash-blonde hair was to become collateral for the debt, collateral that, as was clear to all, would never be redeemed. The scene etched into Lucius's memory remained an unhealing wound. His mother, Livia, desperately clutched him, tears streaming down her face as she tried to fend off the debt collectors. "Mother, I'll return," Lucius whispered with a maturity beyond his years. It was their last meeting for many years. On that fateful day, the innocent child left his family home to plunge into Rome's darkest heart. He did not yet know that a gilded cage of marble and luxury awaited him, where human dignity was valued less than a sip of wine. It was here that the real hell began. Marcus Crassus's magnificent house on the Palatine Hill was truly a regal palace. Columns of Carrara marble adorned the corridors, walls were covered with frescoes depicting glorious deeds, and the gardens were fragrant with Damascus roses. For any Roman, it was the epitome of power and wealth. But for Lucius, this beauty became merely a prison, artfully disguised in gold. He was handed over to Quintus. Lucius endured unspeakable suffering, but in this nightmare, one thing saved him: his mind. Each time his body was subjected to torment, he recalled his father's stories of great heroes like Cato and Scipio. He told himself that dignity could endure even in the most profound darkness. It was there, in the dungeons of Crassus's house, that the small slave began to forge the steel spirit of a future leader. In the very heart of this unbearable existence, like a ray of light in utter darkness, Lucius made a discovery that would define his future life. He realized that true power lay not in physical strength or binding chains, but in the possession of information. This insightful conclusion came to him at the tender age of just 12. During the endless feasts hosted by Crassus, when influential figures treated him as an inanimate object, he listened intently to their conversations. The boy skillfully feigned subservience and invisibility, yet behind his piercing green eyes, not a single detail escaped him. He quickly understood that the Romans, blinded by wine and excessive pride, carelessly entrusted each other with their deepest and darkest secrets, naively believing no one was listening. Lucius possessed a phenomenal memory, enabling him to recall absolutely everything. His mind vividly registered which senator was weaving insidious intrigues against a political opponent, which consul was desperately trying to conceal enormous debts, which patrician secretly harbored lovers or was involved in dubious financial dealings. Without even realizing it, the young slave was becoming the keeper of Rome's most dangerous and compromising secrets. However, Lucius did not limit himself to passive observation. He began to meticulously study his enslavers, analyzing their gestures, identifying weaknesses, and discerning hidden fears. He discovered that Crassus was more terrified of destitution than death itself. that Senator Clodius secretly mourned a lost love, that Consul Lucullus trembled at the mention of names he had once forbidden, where other children, finding themselves in a similar situation, would have fallen into deep despair. Lucius saw clear patterns, vulnerabilities, and hidden weapons. Gradually, he began to transform internally. He remained a slave, forced to wear shackles, but his mind was already utterly free. In silence and unnoticed by those around him, Lucius was building an arsenal far more potent than the swords of legions, knowledge, and he was certain that, at the right moment, this knowledge would become the key to his long-awaited liberation and inevitable revenge. A surprising turn of events occurred in young Lucius's fate when he was barely 12 years old. At one of Crassus's lavish receptions, a promising guest appeared, a young orator whose name was already beginning to resonate in Roman courts. This was Marcus Tullius Cicero. Unlike the others, Cicero kept himself apart from the general merriment. He remained silent, and the pervading venality seemed to fill him with deep disgust. That evening, Lucius was tasked with pouring wine for the principal guests. As he filled Cicero's cup, their eyes met. The orator saw in the slave's eyes not emptiness and brokenness, but a bright glimmer of extraordinary intelligence, hidden beneath a mask of humility. Intrigued, Cicero called him over after the feast concluded. "Can you read, boy?" he asked. Lucius nodded affirmatively. "And write?" came the next question, met with another nod. The orator looked at him intently, as if weighing every word, and finally said, "There is a library in this house. Use it whenever you can. Learn everything you find. The knowledge etched in your mind no one can ever take from you." This advice became a spark that ignited his soul. From that very night, Crassus's library, which served more as decoration than a place of study, transformed into Lucius's secret sanctuary. Early in the morning, while the house still slept, he would creep through the shadows to eagerly devour the knowledge contained in the parchment and papyrus scrolls. Plato, Aristotle, Cato, Roman laws, the histories of great heroes, he absorbed it all with an insatiable thirst. Marcus Tullius Cicero, a perceptive politician and brilliant orator, recognized extraordinary potential in the young slave Lucius and began secretly visiting him, imparting knowledge and guidance. He immersed him in the world of rhetoric, jurisprudence, philosophy, and political intrigue. Lucius understood that power lay not only in the blade, but also in skillfully chosen words. A masterfully constructed speech could sway more minds than an entire army. These clandestine lessons filled him not only with knowledge, but also with something no master could take away, the hope of freedom. Thus, in the guise of a slave, an orator, strategist, and conspirator was being forged, and though his wrists were still bound by chains, in his soul he already felt like a free man. By the age of 14, after 2 years of secret tutelage under Cicero, Lucius had transformed from an obedient child into a young man with a mind sharpened like a blade. Traces of slavery still marked his body, but his spirit had hardened, becoming that of a strategist. He was now ready for his first move in this complex game. He had learned that in Rome, information was valued above gold, and he had enough to bring down even the most influential individuals. Fate presented him with an opportunity during a feast at Crassus's, where Senator Publius Clodius, having drunk heavily, candidly shared a treacherous plot with his ally to assassinate Cato the Younger, the last pillar of morality in the Roman Republic. Lucius, remaining unnoticed like a shadow, overheard the entire conversation. He understood he could not openly report this atrocity, as a slave's testimony held no weight before the law. However, he could use the knowledge gained from Cicero. He composed a letter detailing the conspiracy, and through a trusted slave, delivered it to Cicero, attaching a clear request: "I wish to speak not as a slave, but as a man entitled to justice." The clandestine meeting took place in the sacred temple of Vesta, where daylight served as a disguise from prying eyes. There, young Lucius, with a composure rarely seen in one of his years, revealed his knowledge. Cicero, listening to every word, was astonished by the precision with which the young man recounted the minutest details. "What do you want in return for this information?" Cicero asked. Lucius's gaze was firm and resolute. "Freedom, and something more. I crave their downfall. Let them answer for their deeds." Thus, an unspoken alliance was formed. Cicero realized that the young man sought not merely liberation, but justice, revenge, and he possessed enough intelligence to achieve his desires. Lucius was not just a slave, but a player entering Rome's political arena. On that day, he ceased to be a victim, transforming into a conspirator. The confessions of those involved in the plot against Cato became the starting point. Arrested and interrogated, they confirmed every word Lucius had secretly disclosed to Cicero. Suddenly, the young slave was no longer invisible, becoming the key to a case capable of altering the Republic's fate. This granted him a power that could not be ignored. It was time for Cicero to fulfill his earlier promise, but Lucius's liberation proved no easy task. Marcus Licinius Crassus, whose influence in Rome remained immense, could interpret a direct accusation as a declaration of political war, for which Cicero's circle was not yet prepared. A more sophisticated approach was needed. Marcus Porcius Cato, possessing a sharp mind, discovered a legal loophole. According to an ancient decree, a slave could claim freedom if they could prove they had saved the life of a Roman citizen holding a senatorial office. Lucius, by exposing the plot against Cato himself, fully met this criterion. The emancipation procedure was carried out swiftly, but with all necessary formalities. On the 2nd of March, 78 BC, Lucius appeared in the Forum, surrounded by the watchful gazes of magistrates and senators, intrigued by the unfolding events. Crassus, deeply offended by what had transpired, could not openly obstruct the liberation. He realized that open opposition to Cato and Cicero would jeopardize his meticulously constructed system of power. Thus, in the presence of official witnesses, Marcus Lucius Calpus was declared a free man. He was presented with a pileus, a symbolic cap representing freedom. For the first time in many years, he walked the streets of Rome without shackles or the mark of a slave. He ceased to be a thing, a commodity, property. He became a person, possessing his own name and dignity. However, Lucius did not stop there, for gaining freedom was merely the starting point. True recognition came to him several weeks later, when Cicero himself called him as a witness in a trial that shook the foundations of the Senate. The case concerned Gaius Verus, one of the most unscrupulous and corrupt senators of that era. On that momentous day, the Roman Forum was teeming with people. Patricians and plebeians, merchants and slaves, all yearned to see the young man about whom legends were already being spun. Some called him Cato's boy, others Crassus's shadow, while a third group, with growing deference, simply referred to him as Lucius. As he ascended the rostrum, an excited murmur rippled through the crowd. He was young, too young for such a weighty position, yet his confident bearing commanded genuine respect. He wore a simple white toga, impeccably clean, which Cato had insisted upon. His green eyes sparkled with a blend of composure and inner fire, and when he spoke, his clear and compelling voice, like a blade, cut through the ensuing silence. Honorable senators, I have not come here for sympathy. I have brought you the truth. 3 hours of devastating testimony followed. Lucius meticulously and in detail laid out Verus's crimes, not only the bribes and embezzlement of public funds for which he was officially accused, but also his involvement in secret orgies hosted at Crassus's villas. He named names, dates, sums, even verbatim reproducing conversations memorized with the impeccable accuracy of a scribe. No one in the forum dared to doubt his phenomenal memory. And then came the most poignant moment. Lucius began to speak about himself. With unwavering confidence, yet without a hint of self-pity, Marcus Lucius Calpus recounted his tragic role as entertainment at the exclusive feasts of the Roman nobility. He vividly described how those very men who, by day, loudly debated morality and laws within the Senate's walls, would, by night, turn the lives of young slaves into fleeting amusements like disposable tableware. A deathly silence descended upon the hall. Some senators visibly fidgeted, while on the faces of others a pallor of recognition appeared as they caught echoes of his words. Ordinary citizens, holding their breath, gazed at the young man who, having passed through a crucible of suffering, dared to challenge Rome's most influential figures directly before the entire populace. When he concluded his speech, the hall did not erupt in applause or cries of support. Instead, a thick, oppressive silence hung in the air, as if everyone present realized they had witnessed an epical event. Lucius's testimony not only led to Verus's condemnation and subsequent exile, but also tore the mask of hypocrisy from the corrupt elite, exposing them in all their ugliness to Roman society. From that day, Marcus Lucius Calpus was no longer merely a slave boy. In the eyes of the people, he transformed into a symbol of unwavering justice, a survivor who had found the courage to speak the truth. His name echoed through markets, streets, and even public baths. Lucius, the boy who dared to defy the Senate, people whispered everywhere. For ordinary people, he became a hero. For the patricians, a source of unease, and for Crassus, an uncontrollable threat that had broken free. The trial against Verus was merely a prologue to the events that would follow. Lucius's speeches, like invisible daggers, pierced the hearts of the rotten Roman aristocracy, causing tremors within their ranks. But among all the shadows gathering over Rome, one figure stood out as the most ominous and dangerous: Marcus Licinius Crassus, a man whose wealth had allowed him to buy Lucius's childhood like a thoroughbred horse and cast him into an abyss of suffering. Now this young man, whom Crassus had believed broken, was methodically dismantling his empire from within. Initially, Crassus tried to ignore what was happening, hoping the storm would subside on its own. However, Lucius proved not to be a fleeting whirlwind, but an all-consuming fire, rapidly spreading and fueled by popular anger as well as Cicero's wisdom. Every new testimony, every accusation made, every secret exposed by Lucius relentlessly eroded Crassus's power. His allies, gripped by fear of being swept away with him, began to turn their backs. Then the magnate decided to resort to violence, as he knew best. One night he sent assassins to eliminate the young freedman. But Lucius was no longer a defenseless child. Anticipating such a turn of events, he had formed a personal guard of freed gladiators and war veterans who respected him for his courage and justice. The assassination attempt failed, and the consequences for Crassus were catastrophic. The failed assassination attempt instantly transformed Lucius into a national hero. In the eyes of the people, he appeared not just as a witness, but as a courageous fighter who dared to confront Rome's wealthiest man and survive. On the streets of Rome, enthusiastic cries echoed his name. Lucius! Lucius! Commoners hailed him in the squares, seeing in him their champion. Freed slaves, as if guided by an invisible force, followed him, recognizing him as a leader. Even some aristocratic families, weary of the pervasive corruption, began secretly offering him support. What began as a personal vendetta was inexorably growing into a powerful political movement. Rome, exhausted by the greed of its own elite, saw in this young man a beacon of hope, a symbol of impending change. Cornered by public contempt, Crassus was forced to stand trial on charges of corruption and abuse of power. His vast estate was confiscated, and his former allies, one by one, turned their backs on him, eager to avoid disgrace. Crassus's downfall was as swift and spectacular as his previous rise to prominence. Humiliated and shamed, he was exiled from Rome and found refuge in his estates in distant Asia Minor. There, several years later, he tragically perished in a war with the Parthians, but his name remained forever stained with infamy. Lucius, in contrast, soared to the heights of power like a brilliant meteor. At just 17, he became the focus of intense attention from warring political factions, each seeing in him the embodiment of justice and renewal. However, what was most striking was not his youth, but his carefully crafted strategy. Instead of blindly adhering to outdated political institutions, he made the bold decision to forge his own independent power base. He skillfully drew to his side freed slaves, urban plebeians, landless veterans, and even women from noble families who had lost husbands and sons due to the corruption scandals he exposed. This unprecedented social alliance was a truly revolutionary event in Roman history. The forgotten and dispossessed finally found a leader ready to speak on their behalf and defend their interests. Relying on this powerful support, Lucius took the next step in his political career, putting forward his candidacy for quaestor. For a man possessing neither noble birth nor inherited wealth, such an ascent seemed incredible. Yet Lucius was a figure who transcended the ordinary. His speeches, imbued with sincerity and marked by life's trials, resonated both in the impoverished districts and in the luxurious homes of the patricians. "I have known darkness," he declared, "so that you may walk towards the light." And the people believed him, for they saw the evidence of his suffering and felt the truth in his every word. The elections of 76 BCE marked a turning point in Roman history. Lucius not merely secured a victory, but garnered a record number of votes, surpassing all previous candidates. The impossible had become reality. A former slave, who had known humiliation and deprivation, had managed to break into the very heart of republican power. And this was merely the beginning of his journey. Lucius's election as quaestor caused a genuine sensation in Rome. The senatorial elite looked down upon him with disdain, but could not ignore the accomplished fact. The people, however, adored him, and this was not a blind adoration, but a feeling rooted in shared experience. Lucius spoke the same language as the people, understood their suffering, and shared their life's hardships. He was not a detached patrician promising justice from his palace. He was a man who had endured trials, known squalor, slavery, and evil, yet retained his faith and demanded justice for all. Upon assuming the quaestorship, Marcus Lucius Calp immediately drew widespread attention. Contrary to expectations, he demonstrated independence from influential political factions, making autonomous decisions. He established stringent control over tax collection, effectively dismantling corrupt schemes that were detrimental to the state treasury. Influenced by his personal circumstances, Calp established a fund to aid orphans and street children, and organized specialized courts to hear cases of child abuse, an unprecedented step in Roman history. Every decree reflected his personal experience and his desire to transform personal suffering into protection for others. The people enthusiastically greeted him in the streets. The plebeians saw him as their protector. Landless veterans called him brother, and even some reform-minded patricians began to show interest in him. The name Marcus Lucius Calp ceased to be merely that of a successful freedman, transforming into a symbol of a new Rome. 2 years later, in 74 BCE, he was elected praetor, a surprise to many. Yet, in this role, he continued to implement bold reforms. Calp reorganized the judicial system to expedite trials and reduce opportunities for bribery. He redirected resources to remote provinces that had suffered for decades from unchecked plunder by governors. Furthermore, he also proved himself an exceptional orator. Every speech he delivered in the Senate resonated with the power of a man who had personally experienced what others could only read about in philosophical treatises. A pivotal moment arrived in the life of Lucius Cornelius Lentulus Batiatus, when, at the age of just 20, he was elevated to the consulship, the highest office in the Roman Republic. This event was a true triumph, for never before had a man from the lower echelons of society, nor a former slave, reached such a pinnacle. His election was no mere accident, but rather an expression of the will of a people weary of power-hungry generals and corrupt senators. Rome yearned for a leader who embodied different values, and Lucius became precisely that figure. In his role as consul, he faced his gravest challenge, the Spartacus revolt, which transformed thousands of slaves into a formidable army ready to defy Rome's might. Senators, eager to crush the rebellion by force of arms, insisted on sending Pompey or Crassus, but Lucius, ascending the Senate rostrum, delivered a speech that would forever be etched in the memory of posterity. He declared, "I know the soul of a slave, for I myself was one. I know their hopes, their fears, and their dreams. This rebellion cannot be quelled by swords alone. Only justice can pacify it." His strategy involved a dual approach, firm measures against the most radical leaders of the revolt, coupled with structural reforms aimed at improving the conditions of slaves and freedmen. He proposed clear paths to freedom, improved living conditions, and a ban on the most inhumane forms of exploitation. Concurrently, Lucius secretly negotiated with moderate factions of the rebels, offering amnesty to those who would lay down their arms. Lucius's triumph was truly astonishing. The war concluded triumphantly, exceeding all expectations in terms of duration and minimizing losses, which had colossal political ramifications. For the first time, Rome not only suppressed a rebellion, but used it as a catalyst for profound transformations. The people rejoiced, proclaiming him their savior, and his name echoed throughout the city. Despite the suspicious attitude of conservative senators, they could not ignore his influence. Lucius was no longer merely a promising politician. He had become the most influential man in Rome. Remarkably, he achieved this not through personal armies or inherited wealth, but through sharp intellect, tireless perseverance, and the unwavering support of the people. Lucius's story serves as a reminder of an eternal, albeit bitter truth. True power stems not from wealth or noble birth, but from the ability to transform suffering into purpose. A child sold into slavery, humiliated and reduced to an object, he not only survived inhumane conditions, but transformed his scars into weapons of justice, becoming one of Rome's most influential leaders. His story serves as a mirror for modern society, reminding us, even today, more than 2 millennia later, that greatness lies not in the absence of falls, but in the ability to rise even when the world has turned its back. True strength resides not in inherited privilege, but in the indomitable will of those who, having lost everything, refuse to surrender. Lucius not only changed Rome, but redefined the very concept of power. He proved that even in the most corrupt society, the voice of one individual can shake empires. And though his life was relatively short, his legacy endured for centuries, affirming the idea that human dignity deserves protection and that the most vulnerable must not be forgotten. For, as Lucius's example teaches us, no matter how bleak the beginning, there is always an opportunity to transform pain into greatness.